I'm going to play you a clip, and I want you to tell me what language you think this is.
Some call around Berkal, and at mental station, just starvation. It'll feel on the jilt side, at Bealt side, and you win a see dice for ice.
What language is that?
I have no idea.
Howdy y'all, what's up? We are in Austin, Texas, trying to figure out if people identify this as its own language.
Or a dialect of English.
Before we tell you what this is, we're actually going to play it for you instead of giving you the answer so you can kind of play along.
We want you to guess what language this is or where the speaker is from.
So we're going to play an audio clip for you. It's from a poem, and we just want you to guess what language this is.
Okay.
It'll be some call around Berkal, and at mental station, just starvation. It'll feel on the jilt side, at Bealt side, and you win a see dice for ice. It'll be some roch at the broch, and very roch indeed at Peterhead. It'll be an entrance shower at Aberlour. It'll be real wheat at King's Seat, and at Auchenblay, it'll pour a day.
It's giving Scottish, Irish. I'm gonna go with Scottish.
Any ideas what language that is?
Some sort of Scottish language?
It sounded like, I heard some words English. It sounded like maybe a dialect of English, like around the UK, somewhere in there.
What would you say? You agree?
I was thinking the same thing, yeah.
Any ideas?
At first I thought it was like Scandinavian something, but
Okay.
it kind of, towards the end, started to sound like, I don't know, like Irish or Scottish or something like that.
I have no idea.
Just take a guess.
I mean, if I had to guess, I would say like Swedish, but I know that that's wrong.
It sounds like English, but the accent is like foreign as hell, like Scottish.
Off the top, maybe either some variation of a Irish dialect or Indian, maybe.
And that answer is Scots. The poem is by Douglas Kynock, a former TV presenter and writer from Aberdeen, Scotland. Let's cover some of the basics of Scots. To be clear, we're talking about the Scots language, not the language you may be more familiar with, known as Scottish or Scots Gaelic, Gaelic in the language itself. Gaelic is a Celtic language, closely related to the Irish and Manx Gaelic languages, and the last common ancestor it shares with either English or Scots is probably all the way back to Proto-Indo-European. Scots, on the other hand, is a very closely related language to English. In fact, it is the most closely related language to English, unless, of course, we're counting some other things that might be called dialects as their own languages. But keeping this video focused on the widely recognized linguistic consensus, Scots is the most closely related language to English. The poem itself is specifically the Doric dialect, which is spoken in this region of Scotland, which some say might even be its own language. Even a former Scottish First Minister said when he visited the area that he could only understand about 50% of the Doric that was spoken, and he thought that was better than what most people could do.
But when I went to northeast of Scotland, I mean, I was quite good actually. I was picking up one word in every two. Some folk manage one word in every 10.
Modern Scots and English share a common ancestor in Old English. It was only around the late Old English and early Middle English periods that they really started to diverge. In fact, centuries ago, during the Middle English and early Modern English periods, Scots was widely recognized as its own language of the commoners and nobility alike. It had a rich linguistic history as well as literature history. That literature goes as far back as the year 1375 with stories like Bruce, written by John Barber, which tells the story of Robert the Bruce and James Douglas in the Scottish Wars of Independence. Then, in 1707, the Acts of Union created the United Kingdom of Great Britain, and Scots was discouraged in favor of an England English-based standard. While there have been other periods of revitalization and popularity for Scots, for the most part it's been discouraged in favor of English, with people being told that they speak a poor form of English that they need to fix, rather than the unique and beautiful language that they actually speak.
What we see from the answers of our interviews is that most people identified it as Scottish, even if they did not understand it. So it clearly has a recognizable Scottish accent and sound, even if they did not place it as the Scots language, or even if they misidentified it as English or Scots Gaelic. Most of our interviewees even felt comfortable saying that it was a language of its own and not just a dialect of English, although some were less convinced from just that one example.
So to give them a bit more to reference, we played a short clip of a video that explains the history of Scots, first in Scots, then the same clip but in Scottish English. Let's see what they had to say.
I'm going to play you a video that is the history of the Scots language in the Scots language. And I'll play you that same video clip in English.
Changes in the stonin between Scotland and England had gart Scots tying muckle o' its smedum. As a screvet lead, it mair and mair gied way to English, ance Lunnon came to be seen as heedmaist than matters a lead.
All right, and now English.
Changes in the relationship between Scotland and England had caused Scots to lose much of its prestige. As a written language, Scots increasingly gave way to English once London became the linguistic centre of gravity.
So, did you find that you could understand the Scots version, the first one we played?
I could understand like a couple words. Like I heard like
Mhm.
English, but otherwise
Right.
like not really.
But you understood the Scottish English version.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So would you say that those deserve to be called separate languages?
I would think so, yeah.
I was expecting it to sound like Old English or something, but it sounds so different to me.
Do you understand any of the words that were in the Scots video?
I don't think I understood any besides English.
Okay.
He's saying English and Scots.
Would you say that Scots is a different language than English?
No, just because I understand the difference, like in accents. Like, I mean, people come from all over the world. You know what I mean? To it, primarily English-speaking countries or whatever, and they have like their own way of pronunciation. I'm not gonna fault the Scots. You know what I mean?
Did you find that you could understand any of the Scots?
No.
Nothing?
Like maybe the word English.
The word English?
Yeah, but
Right?
that's it. Yeah.
So but you understood the Scottish English version?
Like with the accent, like with the
Yeah.
Scottish. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think those deserve to be called two different languages?
Yeah. Probably. Yeah.
Would you say that Scots can be considered a dialect of English?
Yeah, I would say so. I think there are enough words in common, but I can't say that I fully understood it.
So would you say that Scots and English are the same language?
No.
Do you think that Scots definitely deserves to be considered a different language from English?
Well, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Did you understand any of the Scots in this one?
Like a word every like 30 or something. I understood the English, 100%.
Does Scots deserve to be called a separate language? I'm gonna say yes, because I feel like, there's a lot of languages that share common words. Like I speak Spanish as well a little bit because of my mom, and like I see similarities with it with like Italian or maybe French a little, like Romance languages. So like I feel like there doesn't have to be like complete separation between the languages. I think it can be considered its own, because I definitely couldn't recognize it at first.
Listening to the Scots version, most people really didn't understand much beyond the word English, but they understood all of the English version. Even after knowing it was Scots and hearing the same thing in English, people did not understand the Scots version. However, this was not enough to change their minds on whether Scots is its own language. Those who said that it is still thought so, and those who said it was a dialect of English still thought the same as well. We recognize that it might seem odd listening to Americans go on about Scots, which we don't speak. Luckily, we actually have some Scottish connections, so you can get some opinions from Scottish people themselves. Carson called two of his friends to ask them their thoughts on the Scots language. So let's listen to what they have to say.
Yeah, I just want to ask a few questions about Scots language/dialect and some of your thoughts on it and maybe your experiences with it. So people don't spend the whole video just listening to two Americans ramble on with no insider opinions. Jan, you are from Montrose, right? Or Eastern Scotland? What would you call the region?
I'd say it's northeast of Scotland, but it's not quite as far as Aberdeen, but between Aberdeen and Dundee is your major cities.
Ali, you're straight from the city of Glasgow.
Yep. From Glasgow.
Do either of you think that you speak the Scots language?
I would say it's mostly English, predominantly. I think Scots is an older language, which is not really used that commonly in Glasgow, although there is certainly some terms that have bridged over and are still used in everyday language.
Yeah, no, I for me it's definitely English. I don't speak Scots. Specifically where I am in the northeast, it's even more. There's even less sort of even Scottish sounding words. I'd say. There's certain areas that we say things that are maybe very specific or very related to the Scots language, but certainly as a language, definitely English.
It seems pretty easy for most Americans to understand you. Yeah, and was there some subconscious because you were in America that you made it? Did you feel like you ever made it a bit easier for people to understand when you were speaking to them?
Maybe a slight element of that, but to be honest, like I mean, I work with a lot of American tourists here, and a lot of them have even said to me, and you know, it's a mix of people's English, American, Australian. So I'm not specifically putting on an accent to make things easier here, and they certainly do say that I'm quite easy to understand for them. They say that.
Now, Ali, I know for sure you're much harder for people to understand. I think for the most part, when we were together hanging out, you know, we could understand you, but once I heard you speak, we were playing a night of footy out in the park, and another guy from Glasgow came up to you, and once you two started speaking to each other, I was like, I thought I understood these two, but now they're switching is something I never heard before.
Yeah, I definitely did experience an accent barrier during my time abroad. I feel like to kind of had to tone down my accent, enunciate and pronounce my words much more than usual. When you heard me conversating with Luke, the other guy that's also from Glasgow, that was us talking more naturally, a bit more sped up. That's probably why it was kind of difficult to understand.
You don't think that even though we might have trouble understanding you when you're speaking, you know, amongst yourself with other people from Glasgow in your like natural accent, you still don't think that that would be considered like the Scots language?
It's a good question. I don't know if the separation is enough to consider it a separate language. I would say it's more of a separate dialect.
So yeah, and you don't really speak that way, but do you find that you can understand Scots like a Glasgow accent or maybe Doric because you're not that far from Aberdeen?
I can understand why certainly people from America or from non-Scottish English-speaking countries find Glaswegian quite difficult, almost like a foreign language. I can understand that, but for me, because I've been maybe it's just because Glasgow, in terms of the media in Scotland, is so important, and you get a lot of the media you get from Scotland is from Glasgow. So I've been around, heard it so long that for me it doesn't sound foreign. Like when I'm hearing Ali speak, I can understand everything he says clearly. It's not like he's speaking a different kind of language. Like for example, I'm in Norway at the moment, and like the Danish and the Norwegians, they can understand each other, but they it's not the same language. They know it's a different language. There's words that, but when Ali's speaking, for me, it's he's speaking English to me. That's the way I view it.
If you think you were allowed to write like in Scots, or at least write the letters kind of phonetically the way you pronounce them, do you think you might more easily consider certain dialects like from Glasgow to be Scots because you weren't held to that English standard?
Yeah.
I do want to just add actually about like sort of the northern eastern part of Scotland. There's a way, certainly like Aberdeenshire area, like the sort of, as I think a lot of the people from Glasgow probably call it the Chukter areas of Scotland, like there's like farming and communities and that. They have certain words which are completely different from English. Or like not different, not completely different. That's maybe a bit extreme, but are more closely linked to like certainly up the northeast way or north for Scotland. You have things that are almost closer to like Nordic languages, and you couldn't say that they're Nordic, but they're almost like they're closer related to that maybe than English.
They had more of that Norwegian and Danish influence from like 1,000 years ago.
Right, exactly. Certainly in the islands, you know, you go to Orkney and Shetland. I mean, Shetland is in a way when I listen to Shetland people speaking, if they're speaking as they would to each other, for me, I would struggle to understand that actually.
We showed our interviewees this section of a Scots translation of a book to see if it would have any effect on our interviewees' opinions of Scots as a language.
He wis a muckle beefy bucket man with a stimpy wee craggy, although he did ha a gay muckle mouser.
Skinny malinky blonde hided woman was craggy wis just a boot twice as long as Ither folk,
which was awfully handy as she spent say muckle time kicking over or garden fences, nibbing at the neighbors.
They had a wee son and tae them there wisne a brower laddie in the hale world. Oh my god. Okay, something about this skinny blonde woman is long. I don't know what it is. I can't think of the book.
I don't know what book.
No clue.
Maybe Goldilocks. Maybe.
Like Rapunzel?
Yeah, I have no idea what book this is.
I'm not sure.
I'll give you one hint. In the book, they play a sport, and the Scots name for that sport is bism ball.
I'm even more confused.
No clue.
So like a Harry Potter thing?
It's not Harry Potter.
It's
is
Harry
it?
Potter.
No way,
Yes,
bro. That's kind of wild. That is wild.
It sounds like it might be Harry Potter.
It's Harry Potter, yes. This is the Scots translation of Harry Potter.
This is from the first page of the first Harry Potter book.
Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's, or rather, the Philosopher's Stone. I took out the names because it was like Mr. Dursley, Mrs. Dursley, and Dudley. So I was like, obviously that'll give it away. So I replaced some of the names with pronouns.
Did you understand any of it?
A little bit.
I honestly get lost really early on.
To be honest, not really. I really took the time to maybe piece the certain words that I did understand together. Maybe I would get a fuller understanding of it, but from first read, not really getting much understanding.
I got the sense that there's like just a description, like a character description going on. And some of the words are familiar, but yeah, that was definitely crazy.
You got me.
Same as me. I think if I really sat down and studied it,
It's not something you would just sit and read, just to read a book.
No.
So after reading Scots, would you still say that Scots should be the same as English? Is it a dialect of English or not?
I would say, I guess I don't really know. I guess I would say kind of, because like, if you just change the words to the words I know, like it would make sense. But at the same time, as it is, I wouldn't understand it.
Would you say that Scots is a dialect of English?
I think I understood that paragraph well enough that I could kind of understand it. So maybe
a little bit less than the audio example. I'd say that's
reading
a little
is
closer.
easier?
Yeah.
I still think it should be its separate language because languages don't have to be like completely different to be considered their own things. Like there's definitely similarities in like Portuguese and Spanish, but they're still different. So I would still think that it's its own language. There's different spellings of things too.
Is your opinion changed now?
In some, yeah, a little bit, only because if I didn't have any like training or know of that dialect or that like accent, I would have no clue just looking at that. I would think it's hieroglyphics or yeah.
So I can say this is definitely closer to a separate language being Scots, although I don't think it's something that you would personally read in everyday life or come across it, unless you were specifically looking for an older Scots version. Some of the words from it, I'm not going to say that Glaswegians don't use it in everyday life.
You can see some of the words are maybe a bit more similar to English than just listening, right?
Right.
But you still think it deserves to be called its own language, separate from English?
Yeah.
I worked with a guy who was a farmer, and there's words in there that he would use, like muckle, and he would use that. There's words there that I think the average Scottish person probably wouldn't use on a daily basis. But there's certain words there that I have heard used by certain areas of Scotland.
I think there's other languages that are similar to English but categorized differently. I think English is a language that has gone through a lot of phases, where at one point in England it had a lot of French in it. And so and even like Pidgin has a lot of English influence, of course, but as a different language. And so, yeah, it just makes sense that it would be a language, but it's probably not a language because of Britain and stuff, right?
Right. That's a pretty nuanced answer there. I like that.
She spent mucky time kicking over cordon fences, nebbing at the neighbor. Wee son, and say them was near brawly laddie and did that help at all, or was that wasting your time? We can see that most people understood some words and even some whole phrases. Many words, especially the smaller words, are even spelt the same as in English, while other words are just similar enough that, when read and not listened to in a very different accent, many people can figure them out. However, people didn't understand the whole paragraph, and even Carson's Scottish friends really felt like they'd have to sit down and study it in order to piece it together, and they definitely wouldn't read it for their enjoyment. After reading that paragraph, the ones who thought it was a dialect of English even changed their minds, despite our assumption that reading Scots would be the easiest to understand and maybe make people more likely to group it as a dialect of English. So, what is the current status of Scots as a language? Does it compare with other languages that are mutually intelligible with one another, or dialects that are less intelligible but still considered dialects of a larger language? Carson did this research for his thesis.
The good thing about Scots specifically is that we are far from the first people to research it. In fact, we're not even the first YouTubers to ask the question, is Scots a dialect or language? So there's plenty of information out there that I was able to use for my thesis and that we're using for this video. And people have been arguing about this for a long time. The first version of the Oxford English Dictionary was made by a Scot, James Murray, and he thought that Scots was just a dialect of English. But the editor of the Oxford English Dictionary after him was also a Scot, William Craigie, and he thought Scots was its own language and should be treated with national significance. And the Scottish government seems to have mixed feelings about the status of Scots. While they're doing a lot to preserve and revitalize Gaelic, with Gaelic and English being found on public signage all over the country, even in parts that historically never spoke Gaelic, as well as Gaelic being available for government websites and things like that. Even an entire BBC Alba channel, which is entirely in the Gaelic language. Scots has little to none of that same kind of infrastructure support. They did start to include Scots information as part of the Scottish census in 2011, where over 1.5 million people said that they speak Scots. And that's over a quarter of the population at the time. Compare that to just about 60,000 people speaking Gaelic and only half of 1% of the population speaking it at home. On the census webpage, there's a slogan, "Shaping Our Future" in English, as well as the Gaelic translation. However, a Scots translation is nowhere to be found. In 2017, the Scottish government announced it would be giving £400 million to various Scottish language programs, and the webpage where you can find that announcement has it in English as well as in Scots. However, very few other web pages on the Scottish government website offer any kind of translation to Scots. The ones that do are typically ones specifically talking about the Scots language. Scots is recognized under the European Charter for Regional and Minority Languages, as well as Ulster Scots, which is a dialect, some might even call that yet another language, of Scots that is spoken in Northern Ireland. However, the UK government only signed Part 2 of this charter, which means that Scots has regional significance, and not Part 3 of the charter, which would mean that it has national significance. The UK not signing Part 3 of the charter led to some politicians from Scotland, like Irene McGugan, to say that that shows the UK is treating Scots as an inferior language, and places its preservation of low importance. So there are clearly different forms of legal and social recognition and support for the language. The Scottish government is happy to promote it, but the actual support of including it in the infrastructure and education and the lives of Scotland seems to be mediocre at best, especially compared to the much smaller Gaelic language, which you can see supported all over the country.
We can also see that Scots is not supported by language translation services like Google Translate, DeepL, or Translate.com, even though they have some languages that are spoken by a much smaller population. And don't get us wrong, we think it's important for those small languages to get support too. But the fact that they put in all the effort for various small languages while ignoring a bigger language like Scots really shows how much or how little people actually care about Scots. Using these translators, we can also get an idea of how similar or different other supported languages are, like Dutch and Afrikaans.
Hallo, dit is een voorbeeld van hoe mijn taal wordt gesproken.
Hallo, hierdie is 'n voorbeeld van hoe my taal gepraat word.
Keep in mind, this is Google Translate and not natural speech from a native speaker, and most of us won't understand these examples, but we can at least notice how similarly they're spoken and written. For more examples, we can look at Portuguese and Spanish.
Olá, este é exemplo de como minha língua é falada. Hola, este es un ejemplo de cómo se habla mi idioma.
Danish, Swedish, and Norwegian.
Hej, dette er et eksempel på, hvordan mit sprog tales. Hej, det här är ett exempel på hur mitt språk talas. Hej, dette er et eksempel på hvordan språket mitt snakkes.
Hindi, Urdu, Gujarati, and Punjabi, which even use completely different writing systems.
नमस्ते, यह एक उदाहरण है कि मेरी भाषा कैसे बोली जाती है.
हेलो, ये एक मिसाल है कि मेरी जबान कैसे बोली जाती है.
હેલો, મારી ભાષા કેવી રીતે બોલાય છે તેનું આ એક ઉદાહરણ છે.
हेलो, ये एक उदाहरण है कि मेरी भाषा किवें बोली जाती है.
And we can also compare how different some things are, like Mandarin and Cantonese, which are both often referred to as Chinese.
您好，这是我的語言的用法範例。你好，呢個係我嘅語言講法嘅一個例子。
Scots also doesn't have support for many language learning programs like Duolingo, Pimsleur, or Rosetta Stone. It doesn't even have support for the closed captions on YouTube. In fact, if you look at one of the clips we used from the History of Scots language in Scots, the description on their video says that the closed captions are identified as Esperanto because YouTube doesn't support Scots, but they support Esperanto, a language, a constructed language that was made up by one guy in 1887. But they don't support a natural language with centuries of history and over 1 million native speakers.
Now that we've calmed down, let's ask one final question. Why is this even important? If we just acknowledge that there's no real difference between a dialect and a language, does it really matter when we stop calling something a dialect of one language and start calling it its own language? We think it's important because, first of all, we don't all acknowledge that there's no real difference between a dialect and a language. Most people probably never really think about the details of this, which is partly why we started our channel with a video exploring and explaining the details of the question itself before going into any specific languages. We think it's often better to recognize the language sooner than later because it can offer support to the speakers of that language. Just like we mentioned with all the translators, language teaching apps, and YouTube closed captions that don't support Scots, even though they sometimes support fictional languages that have extremely limited development and no native speakers. If Scots was more widely recognized, we think people would be much more likely to add support for it.
In other ways, this lack of technological support can cause struggles for speakers of these little recognized languages. Take a look at this video.
What's the buttons? Oh no, they installed voice recognition technology in this lift. I heard about this. You ever tried voice recognition technology? No. They don't do Scottish accents. 11.
Could you please repeat that?
11. 11. 11. 11.
Could you please repeat that?
While that is an old comedy skit, it is actually happening now as voice recognition technology and devices become more common in our daily lives, like in this video.
Alexa, Alexa, I'm trying to talk to you.
And non-recognition can also cause struggles in real life when talking to other people because of prescriptivism. A lot of people might be discouraged from speaking in their natural native accent and language in favor of a more so-called standard dialect or language. They might be told that they're speaking poorly or some even worse adjective or adverb just because they're using their natural speech among their peers. It's perfectly fluent and intelligible within their community, but then sometimes people from a different community hear that and think they have the right to command other people to speak so that they can understand, instead of just taking the time to learn a dialect or language that isn't native to them. So the speakers of those languages and dialects will often face discrimination, especially when prescriptivists don't recognize that as a different language. We believe that recognizing these as independent languages sooner rather than later can be helpful in avoiding some of those challenges, as well as make it easier for those languages to receive some of that useful support. After all, would voice recognition be more likely to be programmed for one distinct dialect with just a few million speakers in a language of hundreds of millions of speakers, or for an independent and widely recognized language, even if it's small? And would a prescriptivist tell somebody that their dialect is wrong if they recognize it as an independent language that they simply don't speak or understand? And especially in this case, if Scotland becomes independent, which is something that's been talked about in Scottish and British politics for quite some time now, we could definitely see a lot more wider recognition and appreciation of the wonderful and beautiful Scots language.
So, what's our conclusion?
I think we've shown with the research we did for this video, what I did on my thesis, and the answers we've gotten from our interviews, that there is definitely enough support, legal, social, and political, to declare Scots its own independent language. The biggest barrier to that being more widely recognized is just that not a lot of people know about the Scots language specifically.
Yeah, especially in Austin, Texas, where we're interviewing people, they may not be familiar with Scotland at all.
Right. So if you're someone who lives closer to Scotland or even in Scotland, you're much more likely to have heard of this language or even understand a lot of it. So you might have a different answer based on your perspective. So we, and I think the broader linguistics community, recognize Scots as its own language.
What do you guys think? Let us know in the comments.
If you guys enjoyed this, thank you so much for watching. The best way to support us is, of course, to like, share, comment, and subscribe. We really enjoy making these videos, and we really want to get more informative, educational videos out there.
We all use language. We all have thoughts about language.
For all kinds of linguistics topics where we can get real opinions and real answers from people on the street as well.
The interviews taken at night were from local Austin artists who took time out of their performances to give us interviews.
So we'd like to show our appreciation by showing their shout-outs, and their information will be linked in the description.
What's your name?
My name is Moonlit Magic, or Ricky, if you want to talk to me.
And where can we find you?
You can find me at Moonlit Magic Music on Instagram.
My name is Davon Latroy. That's DAVON LATROY on all platforms.
I've got a YouTube channel for lifestyle content, Ali Tariq Life, and I've also doing fitness content as well. So if you want a workout, quick and easy, at home, in the park, using only your body weight, then Ali Cali Fit for that.
I'm Khaki. I'm Khaki_Connect on Instagram. Prettiest rapper in Austin. And all my links and stuff are on there.
My name is The Boy, aka Josh or Lawrence. You can find me on Instagram, social medias, Apple, Spotify, all that good stuff at H8 The Boy.
Shaniqua loves music on Instagram and hopefully on Spotify by next year.
Thank you. The poem can be found on the Scots Language Centre website. The History of Scots videos are from the Linguistics Department of the University of Edinburgh, which has one of the best linguistics departments in the world. Those full videos go into much more detail about the history of Scots than we do here.
All those videos we sourced our audios from, as well as all the sources for the government data for things like the status of Scotch, are linked in the description, and we encourage you all to check them all out.
If you made it to the end, thank you so much for watching and supporting us. We'd love to keep doing this, so please like, share, subscribe, comment.
Thanks for watching.
I hope you enjoyed, and see you in the next one.
Bye-bye.